HMS Hermes was one of the most successful carriers constructed for the Royal Navy. She was laid down in 1944 and didn't finish her career in the British fleet until 1984, at which point she was sold to the Indian Navy. HMS Hermes was laid down in 1944 at Vickers Armstrong Limited on Barrow-in-Furness as a member of the Centaur class. She was originally to take the name HMS Elephant, with the name Hermes allocated to a different ship in the class. However, at the end of the Second World War, the original HMS Hermes was cancelled without being laid down, and the name was switched to the ship under construction at Vickers Armstrong. Between June 1944 and 2nd of September 1945, HMS Hermes was built up to the middle deck level, and her main internal bulkheads were completed. But with the Second World War over, all construction work on the carrier was halted. A small maintenance crew were allocated to her to prevent the hull from corroding while on the slipway. Finally, in June 1949, Vickers were given permission to complete Hermes up to the point at which she could be launched. This would allow Vickers to clear the slipway for commercial contracts. And on the 16th of February 1953, HMS Hermes was launched by Winston Churchill's wife, Miss Clementine Churchill. After launching, there was a further break of 2.5 years before construction continued. And finally, in 1959, the vessel was ready for her sea trials. However, she was a much changed ship when compared with her sisters. Before HMS Hermes had been launched, the Royal Navy had begun to include significant modifications into her design. These modifications would allow HMS Hermes to operate all the latest Fleet Air Arm aircraft, and would make her one of the most modern aircraft carriers afloat. She would be significantly more capable than her earlier Centaur-class sister ships, and would be comparable in capability to the recently reconstructed HMS Victorious, albeit with a smaller air group. The first major modification to Hermes' design was the inclusion of two BS-4 151-foot steam catapults in place of the original BH-5 hydraulic catapults. This required strengthening of longitudinal bulkheads to support the catapult troughs. The ship's general structure was also strengthened to support the new heavier aircraft that were expected to enter service. More changes were to follow, a key one being the installation of a deck edge lift. Its placement outboard of the ship's side was a significant improvement over the failed deck edge lift installation of HMS Ark Royal. However, the lift was very heavy, and limitations were placed on rudder angle while the lift was in the down position. The side lift was 54 feet long by 34 foot wide. The aft inboard center lift was 54 foot long via 44 foot wide. Both were rated to handle 40,000 pounds in weight. Further modifications were to come, including the installation of the giant Type 984 3D radar, a reconstructed island, mirror deck landing sites on a new sponson on the port side, and an 8-degree angled flight deck. The electrical systems were completely updated. Hermes was originally designed to be a DC ship, and some of the wiring and generators had been installed. However, it was decided to replace all this equipment and use AC electrical supply instead. Wiring was plastic coated rather than lead coated to save weight. This increased electrical output from 3,200 kilowatts to 5,400 kilowatts, and the change will cost the Navy £1.5 million. accommodation facilities had to be completely overhauled. The ship was originally designed to take a complement of around 1,000 men. However, Hermes' complement ballooned to over 2,000. To put that into perspective, her sister HMS Centaur's complement was 1,390. Her machinery comprised of 2-shaft Parsons geared turbines with 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers, producing 76,000 shaft horsepower and giving her a top speed of 28 knots. The machinery was modified to allow for unmanned operations in case of nuclear contamination. The extra weight of her reconstruction caused a slight loss of endurance over her sisters. It was predicted that in tropical waters, 6 months out of dock, she would make around 25 knots. However, this would be reduced by a further 1.5 knots when under heavy steam load during catapult launches. Endurance would also be reduced from an expected 6,000 miles at 20 knots to 4,800 miles at 20 knots. Hermes' deep load displacement on completion was 27,800 tons. Her dimensions were a length of 774 foot 3 inches, a beam of 147 foot 11 inches, and draft of 27 foot 10 inches. Her hangar was 356 foot by 62 foot with a height of 17 foot 6 inches. The Royal Navy accepted Hermes into service on the 18th of November 1959. Her initial air group comprised of Scimitars of 804 Squadron, Sea Vixens of 890 Squadron, Gannet AEW-3s of 849 Sea Flight, and Westland Whirlwind helicopters of 814 Squadron. Hermes had a major refit between March 1964 and February 1966 to allow her to operate the Blackburn Buccaneer. Her port 151-foot BS-4 steam catapult was replaced with a 175-foot BS-4A. Her arrestor gear was uprated and the flight deck was strengthened and a new Flyco compartment was built into the island. On top of these modifications, all her anti-aircraft guns were removed and replaced with Sea-Cat missile systems, and the ship was fully air-conditioned. Hermes' new air group would consist of 6 Blackburn Buccaneer S2s, 11 Sea Vixens, 3 Gannet AEWs, 6 Wessex helicopters, 2 Whirlwind search and rescue helicopters, and a Gannet Cod for air freight. On completion of her refit, she undertook high-speed trials in the Channel, where she achieved just 26 knots. On Monday, the 22nd of June 1970, Hermes was paid off and was converted from a fleet carrier into a commando carrier.